Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Rossinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. You know what I'm about to say. Download the Veritas app, share it with your friends, share it with your family. You'll have access to all of our station's content, not just the front line with Joe and Joe. And Joe and I do go live 9 o'clock Eastern time on social media, where, as everybody knows, we get into a whole lot of trouble. Having said that, if you like those interviews, if you like or those conversations, these interviews, Veritas is gracious enough to let us use these, the audio video to put online on X, Rumble, Facebook, YouTube, the whole 9 yards. So if you like what we do, if you like the conversations, help us out to a wider audience, like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Now, Joe and I always talk about going into the breach. We like to think we talk about very important topics. Today, we're talking about a very important topic in America, okay, which is mental health care, particularly from a Catholic point of view. To discuss that, we have on Dr. Greg Bottaro, and we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna go into the breach. If anybody thinks there's not a mental health crisis in America, I don't know what you're looking at, and that's
Just
why
come
we
to New
have Greg on
Jersey.
to talk. What's that?
Just come to New Jersey. It's
Just go to
mental.
New Jersey. You can see it first. Drive up Route 17 or the Turnpike. You'll see it for yourself. Some of you out there know Dr. Bottaro. Having said that, he is a Catholic psychologist, founder of the Catholic Psych Institute, and creator of the Catholic Psych model of applied personalism. We're going to get into all of that, and he's going to tell us what that's about. He received his doctorate in clinical psychology from the Institute for the Psychological Sciences and works to integrate Catholic philosophy and theology with relevant psychology. He leads the Catholic Psych Institute's mission to create a Catholic standard for mental health. Since its establishment in 2012, Catholic Psych Institute has grown to serve clients around the world. Most recently, Dr. Greg launched the CPMAP certification to train others in their model of integrated accompaniment. Dr. Greg Bottaro, welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe, brother.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here with you guys.
Awesome to have you. I'll hand it over to Joe and we'll get started.
Greg, we always begin with a prayer to Our Lady in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Remember, our most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly to you, a virgin of virgins, our mother. To you, we come, for you, we stand sinful and sorrowful. O Mother, the incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency, answer us. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. What Joe Pasillo did not mention in bio was Greg used to be a CFR. Now, I do remember you, believe it or not, when you had a long beard. Now you're like a handsome guy. You're a handsome Italian guy. You know, I also was involved heavily at the time with the CFRs. I was a lay associate. Now I have 5 kids. You have 7. So you got 2 up. But at the end of the day, I do remember you. And when I saw your name, I said, we got to talk to Greg. This can be a great conversation because very, very important. Clearly, mental health is at the forefront of America right now. You don't have to look very far. You know, I was kidding around about New Jersey, but at the same time, I'm not kidding. New Jersey, a bunch of crazy people. But at the same time, you go to New York City, which I work in New York City 3 days a week. I mean, you don't have to look far. It's very sad what you see. It's all over America. Talk about your view, you're a professional, of the mental, state of America, how it's maybe deteriorated, particularly of late.
Yeah, well, I appreciate starting off with some of my background there. You know, as a friar, I was almost 4 years a Franciscan friar, and following the call of serving God's people, when I realized I was actually called to marriage instead, I still had that same desire. And so I became a psychologist out of a sort of deepening of my vocation. And that seemed like the most sort of reasonable way to keep doing the same kind of work, but in a secular way. Obviously, with a profession, I need to get paid. I'm going to raise a family. And so what kind of job do I want to get? That seemed like it made a lot of sense. So I've always looked through this lens of, when people are suffering, whether it was a homeless coming to the door at the priory, or the people that we were handing out turkeys to with Father Benedict with the associates, or anything else that we're doing there, it's like, what's really going on? It's a human person, we can look at it through a spiritual lens. We can look at it through a psychological lens. But people are suffering, and I think in general, we've seen an increase in the kinds of symptoms that are appearing from the suffering. But it's the same trajectory. It's the same core theme that's always been in the heart of human suffering. And so, what I see when I'm looking out there, it's like our culture, our society has moved further away from God. Our society has moved further away from objective truth, goodness, and beauty. Traditional values that used to be just taken for granted. And now everything is up for grabs. Make up your own truth, figure out how you want to live. And that lack of foundation is really disorienting for people. And so we have something in our hearts that's sort of like a compass towards living a good life, towards humanity, like the way it's supposed to be, that God built us with. And we need people around us. We need culture. We need society. We need institutions in society to nurture moving that compass in the right direction. You rip everything away. It's like ripping away true north away from a compass. What is the compass going to do? It starts spinning. It has no orientation. And that's what's happened inside of it with our society. And that's what's happening for people now. So we have no direction. And that's why we see so much suffering happening on such a widespread scale in New Jersey and Manhattan and Connecticut and everywhere else.
Don't worry, they're cuckoo in Arizona too. Just to throw that out. Not that I'm not. I'll put myself top of the list. If you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, we're having a great conversation with Dr. Greg Bottaro. We're discussing Catholic mental health care, and we're going to get into all his work. I do want to go here, Greg, if you don't mind. Dispel this, please, for our audience. This constant drumbeat that we hear from the aggressive atheists, and we've heard for a long time that the Catholic Church is anti-science and everything else. The Catholic Church, and this is where I want your comment. The Catholic Church is the first one. There's so many Catholic priests I've known in my life who study psychology. So if the Catholic Church is anti-science, why are you studying psychology? Okay, we understand. We just happen to acknowledge that there's such a thing called the demonic. And people going back to the beginning of humanity have been possessed by the demons, Satan himself. Church acknowledges that. The church is the first one to acknowledge the first problem a person might have is a mental health issue, and then try to seek to help that person there. And not just in the case of the demonic, but also just in general, okay? A Catholic psychologist, but the Catholics look at the world a little bit differently than everybody else. But here's my larger point, and this is where I want your comment. But we acknowledge the science of it first, okay? We try to get to the root of the cause that doesn't necessarily have to be spiritual. It could be something. It could be mental illness. Where am I wrong, Greg? Or tell me if you agree.
No, 100%. And this is definitely a modern cultural sort of critique of religion that is completely unfounded. And so really the foundation of science as a field has roots in a Catholic worldview. And in fact, some of the first scientists that really developed the scientific method and an approach to the world around us were looking for ways specifically to give God glory in the created world that he gave us. And it's like, okay, God gave us this amazing gift. Let's understand it better. Let's really appreciate this. If somebody gives you a car, it's like, okay, great, I can get from A to B. But do you know the difference between a Lamborghini and a Honda? If you want to start exploring it, like, oh, let me understand this engine. Let me understand this, the way this thing works. So that was the initial approach. People don't realize that even Darwin, all these things that have passed down to us and got filtered through postmodern relativism, Darwin, was looking for ways to understand. He never thought there was no creator just because he started to put connections together for evolution. So that sort of polemical dichotomy, that sort of like it's either this or that, that's a modern invention, and it's totally wrong. I do a lot of work, and we could go in any direction you want to in this conversation, but you mentioned the demonic. Whether it's the demonic, I actually have recently got to work on both sides of this. I do work sometimes with cases where there's demonic issues, because there's always going to be a psychological dimension as well, and I step in to try to figure that out. But on the other side of it too, which is really cool, on the positive side of things, is
the canonization process for saints, where we're looking at miracles. And also we want to find out, is there a natural explanation to a certain miracle, or do we have to see this as supernatural intervention through the intercession of a person who may be in heaven? But like, we always want to be involved. So I, as a psychologist, I'm involved in these cases because the church has it in their law that if we're going to talk about things that are supernatural, we are necessarily also looking at the natural, and we want to understand that better. So our church is at the forefront, on the front lines of the best kind of science that's out there. And without that religious perspective, the rest of science actually ends up really flawed. And that's another angle we could go at this. And that's the work we're doing at Catholic Psych, is seeing that the mental health field or other scientific fields that especially that have to do with the person, when you take faith and religion out of it, then you actually are distorting the science, and it becomes bad science, which is why we're in the mess that we're in right now, I think, as a mental health field.
Greg Bottaro, Dr. Greg Bottaro is with us at the front line with Joe and Joe. The reason why I brought it up, Greg, and then I'm going to throw it over to Joe, is because I've had conversations. One of my dear friends that I've met here in Arizona is an atheist. He was born Catholic. He's now a self-identified atheist. He looked at me like I had three heads when I told him, well, the Catholic Church discovered the scientific method. I mentioned Albertus Magnus, Aquinas, all the Catholic priests whose science we still rely on today, like Gregor Mendel. Right. And others. Lemaitre created the Big Bang Theory. And he looked at me because he didn't know that. Because he's a little younger than me. I'm 58. He's like 40. He's a little younger than me. And he grew up, let's say, listening to Sam Harris and the rest of them, okay? And just accepts that the church is anti-science. Shocked to find out. Said, no, this is an historical fact. I'm not giving you my opinion. The Muslims didn't come up with science. The atheists didn't come up with science. The Jews didn't come up with science. The Catholic Church created the scientific method, discovered the scientific method. And I know I get animated about that, but sometimes I just want to let people know, look, do a little reading before you start beating up on anybody. Do a little bit of reading, especially in this conversation. When that's why we're so happy that you came on, Greg, because there's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to the Catholic Church's view on those who are suffering with mental illness. So thank you for that. The explanation that you gave. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to go with Dr. Bottaro?
Just real quick, it's Saint Albert. What was his last name again? Who discovered the scientific method?
So I just know Albertus Magnus, Albert the Great.
Every time you mention that, Joe Priscilla, I think of like the world's strongest man competition. You ever watch one of those things, Sven von Svensson or something like that from Sweden?
You would have to go to professional wrestling.
Every single time you say that, that's what comes to my head. I said
for everybody out there, Joe still thinks the Iron Sheik is the greatest athlete to ever have existed in the history of the planet.
I just had to throw that out there because that's what comes to my head every single time you mention that dude's name. Greg, let's talk about the pandemic and also political craziness. I mean, I have seen some pretty wild displays as of late. Particularly, like I'll just to share with you, when we got back into our office with the pandemic, I remember because I was forced to take the shot, or I couldn't walk in my building. Thank God my wife and children were not, but I couldn't work. So I was in between because I waited to the very end. And I can remember before I took the second Pfizer shot, it was a known entity that I did not take the whole, cycle. There was a guy, he wouldn't stand next to me. Like, I was like, dude, this dude's nuts. Like, I mean, I have to work there. So, like I gotta make a living, like everybody else. But I'm like in my head, like this dude's just crazy. And that's just one example, personal example. And I've seen other crazy things, people just going nuts. Also, people who were stuck in their apartments in Manhattan. I mean, I live in the suburbs, but I mean, say you weren't from Manhattan and, you're in lockdown in a little box, like a lot of apartments. It's like being in prison, and people were terrified. So that has, that plays on people's heads. Also, the political stuff. I've seen people go berserk as well, like where you're just like you're unhinged. We all have our political, views, but I have seen some clips on Twitter where you're just like, holy Christopher Columbus, this person's nuts, like completely nuts. And I'm not even saying that in a funny manner. It's just behavior that's not only isn't it acceptable, but it's unhinged. What are your thoughts on that as a professional?
Well, again, if we have this model of understanding the human person the way God made us, and we talk about it really simply, it's just the integration of faith, reason, and science. And so we have a foundation based on revelation of who we are. Christ reveals us to ourselves. He shows us what it is to be human in its perfected form. And then we have the rational faculties that he gave us to kind of reason through some things to understand ourselves a little better. And then we have science, where we make observations and come to different theories and ideas about the person. So faith, reason, and science. If we integrate those three things, we can have a really solid understanding of the human person. And if you start there, it's actually pretty simple. I mean, all these things you're talking about are really predictable. They're really understandable. We are made as social creatures. This is something that actually secular science doesn't really understand yet. But we have a need. It's part of our essence and our very being to be in relationship. So like the scientific method currently as it's used, when you come up with like, okay, we're going to do a research study and we're going to look at all the variables that might affect the person's experience going through this research and the outcomes of it. Very rarely do they actually think about that person in relationship. Did this guy have a fight with his wife on his way into the lab to take this test or to take this drug injection? Or it's like, nobody thinks about all these relational dynamics, even as we study science. But we can know by faith and reason that we're made in the image of God, who is a Trinity, in communio, in this communion of persons. We are made out of that. So we can't understand ourselves in isolation. Okay, that's the first premise. So that means that if how we are in relation with each other is so deep into the way God made our brain, our hearts, our minds, everything about how we grow, and also our survival instincts and our cognitive biases. So we're always looking for, am I on the in or am I on the out? What are people saying? Where are the threats against me belonging into this community that I'm in? Or might I get cast out? Is there a disease that's going to kill us and it's going to, it's like all these things. Well, then there's power differentials that are at play because community also needs hierarchy. And so then there's a drive for power. There's a drive for self-protection by the use of power. So you can start to understand all the political movements that are happening. And so, yeah, then you have this whole COVID thing. I mean, the social contagion of the fear and the fear-mongering just lit up. And so we had a perfect storm because social media has already been breaking down our connective tissue in real relationships, really, they say, since like 2012, 13, 14. And so we had 5, 6, 7 years of this slow deterioration of real connective fibers of relationships between people. And then you get to 2020, and then it's like this explosion where all the fear, all the separation, the actual manifestation of social isolation now happens. And it's like everything we were afraid of, it's not dying from a disease, actually. I mean, that's always at the root of our fear. We're always afraid of death. But the implicit fear, the thing that we didn't even realize we were so afraid of, we were creating for ourselves. Like disease taking root in community, we're trying to supposedly protect our community, but we're actually isolating and separating ourselves from each other, which is an explicit and direct killing of our community. So we didn't realize what we were even doing to ourselves. Now everybody's saying like, oh yeah, that social isolation was really bad for us. But it was all these factors that were already starting to come together. We could have already seen that. And I was already making videos in 2020 talking about this very thing because we already have the model. Like we didn't need to do research to figure out that this was going to be a bad thing. If you already start with this blueprint of the human person, you already can anticipate what's going to be bad for the human person. So I think that's what's happening now. We haven't really recovered that yet.
Well, Greg, let me ask you this. If you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, Dr. Greg Bottaro is here. We're talking about mental health care, the Catholic view on mental health care. And Greg, we're going to get into the Catholic Psych Institute and all that. We want you to let our audience know that. Here's my thing. I'm not the Lord's most courageous person. Let me say that right away. And I'm not a tough guy. I promise you that. I did not feel fear during COVID. I did not. Okay. And I'm tell you where I go with this, and I'd love a comment. I felt anger, righteous anger, I thought, okay, at everything that was going on. We won't get into all that. But one thing I noticed about a lot of people, and I'm sorry, this is a result of a nihilistic, secularist culture that we have. You have no hope. That's why you're sitting home in fear. That's why you're wearing a mask even after the government said that the COVID crisis is over. That's why you wear a mask in your car, okay, where there's nobody around, okay? Because I'm sorry if I sound judgmental, Greg, okay? But that's my observation, is that the reason why me and Joe and other Catholics, we were all angry, but none of us feared, because we don't, I want to make sure I say this properly. We don't fear death because we have hope. We have hope in Jesus Christ. That's who we are, okay? That's our worldview, okay? So I didn't feel hopelessness, but I'm watching everybody out there who's so afraid because they don't have any hope. And tell me if I'm wrong in my assessment, but that was my take on that whole thing, is that the reason why this is being perpetrated on us is people in control know that they can instill fear like that because people are lacking hope. Your thoughts?
100%. If anger is an emotional response that's appropriate as a reaction to an injustice, and you kind of implicitly perceived the injustice of a system built around isolation and being really narrow-minded and not having this larger perspective of where we have hope, and that's what we've lost. We don't have a Christocentric society anymore, and so there needs to be built in an answer to the question of what happens when you die. Like, that's the underlying question in the heart of every human person across the globe, across all time and place. And when you have a society, again, that sort of supports and nurtures structures to understand that, that's why, like, funerals are so important. The rituals, the different things that we understand about how we talk about people who die, or what, the process, or when we could say, hey, I'm going to pray for you, or, we're going to ask for prayers for people who have gone ahead. It's like, that's all just embedded within a healthy society, completely gone now. And so then you have this, like, threat of how we all might die here, and people go berserk. And so that's what you see, the person in a car with a mask on or whatever. And that's exactly what's happening there. It's the full conclusion. It's like drawing out these implicit ways of living out to their fullest consequence, and then it's just all around you.
Yeah.
And you realize, like, this is why we want to have the Ten Commandments monuments, and why we want to have the prayer in school, and why it's like why we want to pledge allegiance under God. Like, these are the things that we need in our world.
Yeah, no, I agree 1,000%. Joe Rossinello, let's get in a quick question before the break, and then we'll get into Greg's work on the other side.
Let's just talk about modern psychotherapy. I think obviously there's definitely a need for it. Obviously, some people need to take medication. I'm not denying that. I'm not an expert. But I think they're very quick to just give people medicine. Press a button, take medicine, and become a zombie, and go in the corner. What are your thoughts on that? Because I think it's Tucker Carlson recently did a very good interview with a woman talking about that, her journey. She was a Harvard graduate, how she spent like over a decade basically like, in a lobotomy, like she had a lobotomy, in a corner because she was heavily medicated. What's your thoughts on that approach?
I have some very strong opinions on this, but I feel like this is a place that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
No, it's totally fine here, brother.
Yeah, no, I like this show. I think that the healthcare industry and what's happened is one of the most evil things that can happen in our society. It's like the structures of power are completely taking advantage of people's vulnerabilities and lack of understanding, and then they're also tapping into these these sort of illusions of support for conclusions and truths, as if these things are set in stone or already known. You know, we use the word science, that word gets thrown around. But the fact of the matter is, and honestly, I think we're very far from a really robust understanding of this, because even the Catholics doing this work, we just have no foundation to stand on in our training. So a lot of the people that are doing good work in this are sort of almost kind of making it up as we go along. Like, how do we bring all these things together? And the answer is there's never a place for a full separation of body and spirit when we're talking about something that's human. And so the materialistic sciences will completely negate legitimate spiritual considerations. And I say legitimate because, sure, we'll throw you a bone if you want to talk about whether you go to a seance or a voodoo class, or if maybe you're a Protestant, maybe you're Catholic, maybe you're Muslim, maybe you're this, maybe you're whatever. It's like, okay, you can check that box on the paper. But no, what we mean by spirituality is believing in something transcendent to ourselves, an objective truth, goodness, and beauty that we submit ourselves to. That is absolutely disallowed. You're thrown out of the sciences for something like that. So the fact is, you know, and kind of circling back around, if somebody says, okay, I've got this, it seems like a demonic possession. Is this spiritual or is this psychological? Wrong question. Oh, this person has ADHD. It seems like we're going to diagnose this person with ADHD. Do they need medication, or do they need behavioral interventions, or do they need to pray more? Wrong question. Every one of these approaches is disintegrated. Instead, if we actually trained people to understand the whole human person as an integration of body and spirit that are impossible to actually separate, every one of those questions is, what part of what we're seeing is a physical issue? What part of what we're seeing is spiritual? And what is the best first line of intervention? How should we approach this first, based on the symptoms that we're observing? Every single issue that a person is seeking help for will have a set of interventions that are spiritual, a set of interventions that are physical, and then I see that as an overlap between the two, the set of interventions that are psychological, which is kind of like the overlap in the psyche between body and spirit. That's how we should answer every one of those questions.
Greg, we're going to take a quick break. I look at what you just described as the way I look at sin and the way we deal with sin. Okay. The spiritual part of it is that, yes, I go to confession and I receive forgiveness from God, from Jesus Christ, and I receive the grace necessary to do what? Modify my behavior. The sin doesn't go away. The inclination towards it doesn't just miraculously. Some people it does. God will. That's a unique act of God. Okay. Most people it's to develop virtuous habits. That's behavioral. Starts with grace. You need the grace to start in that direction and start to develop the habits that help you to grow in holiness and to avoid sin. What's the problem? One's spiritual, one's behavioral, and the church would say, exactly. I make a firm purpose of amendment to not do it again. And then I start to begin the process of developing the virtuous habits that will enable me to avoid sin. Sorry for my diatribe, but I wanted to throw that in because what you just said was so powerful. Let's take a quick break. Dr. Greg Bottaro is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. When we come back, we're going to get into his work at the Catholic Psych Institute and the Catholic Psych model of applied personalism here at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Rossinello. We are way in the breach with Dr. Greg Bottaro. We're discussing Catholic mental health care. Joe, do you mind if I get it started?
Please.
So tell us, Greg, let's start with this. Tell us about the Catholic Psych Institute and what you do there.
Yeah, we started in 2012 after I graduated my doctorate in clinical psychology, but I have a history of being a Franciscan friar for 4 years, being spiritually formed by Father Benedict Rochelle and Franciscan spirituality. I also have training in philosophy. And so I wanted to bring together faith, reason, and science so that we could have a real model of the human person, so that when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I have this issue, if I'm going to say, how can I help you? That's really important. I'm professing to have the ability to help somebody. That means that I better know what the heck I'm talking about. And so if I'm going to help a person, I have to understand the person. It's like if you take your car, if your car's broken down, you take it to the shop, and the mechanic doesn't know how the car is made, it's not a good move bringing the car to that shop. If a mechanic says, hey, what can I do for you? It's like, my car's making this noise. The guy better know how the car is made. But what we have in the mental health field is a bunch of therapists, a bunch of people trained. They were never trained on the actual truth of the human person and what the person is. How are they going to help you? So what I wanted to start was a place where it was going to be safe, it was going to be acceptable, it was going to be expected that anybody who's working underneath this brand, this name, is going to have a full understanding of the human person. And so it started off as a private practice. I had new grads come get trained, get supervised. We built a group practice. Then we started to put some of this out there as content, courses people could sign up for. I started finding bridges where I found in our Catholic faith, people were kind of missing the mark. We're talking about, confession, for instance. It's like, some people go to that confession over and over and over and over again for the same sin. And at some point, it's like, maybe you want to talk to a therapist about this. Like, no, I just have to keep praying. I'm not praying hard enough. I need to fast more. I need to whatever. It's like, okay, yes, that's good. But also, maybe there's some mental things happening here, some behavioral things happening here that will maybe help you actually overcome the sin. Well, if we could put these things together, find ways that even Catholics are negating their psychological health, maybe find ways in which the secular world is negating spiritual health, I'm all about building bridges. And so, we've been working to do that. We have a model of accompaniment. I call it mentorship. And we kind of changed the paradigm on how we help people. So instead of, coming once a week for an appointment in an office or on Zoom, 45 minutes, totally separated out from your normal life, I wanted to use technology that we have available to us to actually be in a person's life on a day-to-day basis, so we can actually have a dialogue that is an ongoing conversation. We talk with the people we're walking with every single day. And then we can actually get in there with people. When you're going through something, you can tell us about it in that day, not waiting till next Tuesday at 4 p.m. or whatever your appointment is. And out of that, we were able to understand a much deeper integration of how God made us with the ways that people are suffering. And then most recently, the way that's developed even further is that we built a whole certification program for training other people who want to help others. And so we're helping people with their issues. We're training people to help other people with their issues. And that's sort of where we've built out what Catholic Psych is today.
I think it's so important, Greg, what you're doing, because we need to realize that as Catholic, that we have to understand God could do anything He wants. God could directly heal you in as He did, as Jesus healed in His ministry. He healed the blind man right on the spot. There was no process there. It was like, all right, you're blind, you're healed. That happens. We know that happens. In the ordinary course of events, God will guide you into the direction perhaps you're supposed to go. I will tell you from my personal experience, okay? Full disclosure. A couple years ago, I was seeking a therapist, all right? I had some things that I needed to get over in my life. I found a good Catholic therapist who had a good reputation, who understands psychological issues, psychological damage over the course of time, and also the spiritual element of it. It was fantastic, okay? I got it all because she understood that what I was going through wasn't an either or proposition. It was probably a both and proposition. And she helped me, quite frankly. So yes, the prayers, the rosary, going to adoration, all of it, that contributed to making me pick up the phone and call a Catholic doctor and go get some help. That was God saying, go get help, dummy. All right. I'm steering you in the right direction. God wasn't calling our audience dummy. He was calling me dummy.
Yeah.
Joe Resinello, where do you want to go with Dr. Bottaro?
Talk about the stigma, because it's a good lead in, because there is a stigma to saying, like, especially men, people don't want to say like they need help, but around mental health. I think there is a stigma that society placed on that. Um, Talk about that and maybe encourage somebody who may be listening to this that says, I can't get over whether it's pornography, I've gone to confession a million times, or whatever the issue, to potentially reach out.
Well, yeah, this is huge. It's a giant topic. I think it connects back to what I started off saying of the way we're built for community. And so we need each other. So we want to look like we fit in. We don't like our weakness because we're afraid that weakness is a reason to cast us out. Like we're going to be unaccepted, we're going to be rejected. And so we build this implicit sort of assumption that in order to be liked, we have to be strong, we have to be perfect. And this is why I love Saint Therese of Lisieux, because she saw that genius of the opposite if we invert that. And this is what God came to show us. He came for the sinners. He came for the sick. The healthy don't need the doctor. The sick do. And he's the divine doctor. So if we are going to have a place for Jesus in our life, we're going to have to recognize how sick we are. And so the beauty of this is it's really hard to keep up the illusion of being perfect. It's not hard once you accept the fact that it's okay to be not perfect. And I can tell you right now, like the stigma for mental health is because it's really easy to continue the illusion of having everything together when it comes to our emotional life, because all you have to do is just hide stuff. And so men have a different approach to this, women have a different approach to this, but this is why men want to have like the physical manifestations of success, of power, money, accumulating, different kinds of accolades, all that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, I'm good, right? I'm good. Like you're not going to reject me. You want to follow me. You want to be with me. So the opposite of that is what God came here for, which is like, where are the places that you are actually broken? And I tell this to people all the time. We have to have leaders who lead with their frailty, who are willing to say, like Bishop Conley, took a year off because of mental health needs. And I think he's an amazing light in the darkness and hope for us to recognize, like, bishops have weaknesses. They should be leading with those weaknesses. I'll tell you right now, honestly, this just happens to be providential. Literally this morning, I started writing an email to a therapist who I know that I can help me because I need a therapist right now. It's like that shouldn't be an embarrassing thing. It shouldn't be something that says like, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I failed. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm definitely not perfect. I definitely have things to work on. I don't want to try to do this on my own because that's actually the stupid thing. And then if I recognize like there's people to help us here, we should be tapping into these things and using all the resources that God is providing for us. Let's do it. That's what I'm here for. I'm here for conversion, not for trying to pretend like I'm perfect and pulling the wool over somebody. It's like, no, forget that. We need to lead with that. And then I think we can start to actually take away the stigma that people have with mental health.
I love that you said that because to me, if there's somebody who's saying, who's a leader, let's say, in a worldly sense. Yeah, if you show me that there's certain vulnerabilities that you have, okay, that you're honest with yourself, I'm going to be more likely to lead you than the guy who just beats his chest and says I'm perfect. Okay, we've had enough of that, and the funny thing is, none of them are perfect, and you'll find out real quick that person is not perfect. Dr. Greg Bottaro is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. We're talking about Catholic mental health care. Doc, share if you would, if you don't mind, maybe a success story to kind of illustrate your work and how it's been helpful to a person.
Oh man, well, gosh, it's awesome. We have the most blessed job. This vocation is amazing because we get let into the inner life of so many people, kind of like a priest must feel like with confessions. But we get to like walk every day with the people and actually see them towards their success. So I just comes to mind actually because we're talking about being a friar in the past. I had a priest I was working with who was 3 years out of ordination, and he was like had a lot of natural talents and skills, was really likable, and so of course he was given all the responsibilities. Was sort of a lot was put on his plate right away, and he just started to get burned out, and he started to feel it like depression, and then he had a lot of anxiety start to come over. Then he had doubts about his vocation, and then he had a relationship with a person who he felt like maybe was a little dangerous, like just emotionally there was like too much vulnerability, and that's what kind of triggered him to reach out. And he's like, I don't want to do anything to jeopardize my vocation, my mental health. I just need help. So we sort of started walking through this process of understanding what the underlying narratives were. And because he was so high functioning, and that's the illusion. People think like, well, if I'm not like, seeing things, or if I'm not hearing voices, or if I'm not like depressed where I want to kill myself, or if I'm not whatever, then I don't need a professional involved. It's like that is just so short-sighted. And so, same thing with physical health, right? It's like we could go off on a tangent there too, but the point is he had enough forethought to stop before getting to a place where it all fell apart. And because he was so high functioning, it kind of slipped under the cracks that he needed to be considering his own actual needs, his own constitution of how God made him physically, spiritually, and psychologically. And so, because the priesthood, especially right now, is in some places are really struggling for vocations, and there's so many needs. And then, if a priest is not there, there's nobody for baptisms, nobody for funerals, for weddings. Like, you put that spiritual responsibility on somebody, and it's just crushing. And he had very good reason to say, like, I just got to keep showing up. I just have to do these 47 other things that are unreasonable, but I got to do it anyway. And eventually, before cracking, he realized, okay, if I don't take a step back and really take my day off and really do my liturgy of the hours and actually do my canonical retreat and actually take time off to go fishing and hiking, I'm not going to be here for these people in 3 years. So think about all the weddings that won't get witnessed then. All the funerals that can't get said when you're not the priest anymore because you broke down and you're now off somewhere else. So he was able to put all that together. He was able to take a vacation, which was a milestone that was really enjoyable. And he started to put pieces back together that he could understand, okay, if I respect the way God made me and steward it according to God's principles, not mine, uncovering all those hidden subconscious narratives that made me sort of do things differently than what God wanted, then actually we can have a life of flourishing and health.
No, absolutely. I always thought that Greg Bottaro is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. We're discussing Catholic mental health care. I always thought that, the two extremes of that are, one is where you don't do anything. And full disclosure, I've fallen into that in my life, in my adult life, the pressure, the depression, things like that, where you feel like, oh, well, why should I do this? And then you got the opposite direction, which is the guy who doesn't know how to take his foot off the gas, and he's got it floored. The only problem with that is you're going to go real quick. You're going to blow that engine, and finding that middle ground, I think is very, very important, which I'm sure you deal with both extremes, I'm sure, all the time. Dr. Greg Bottaro is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. So, Greg, real quick before I hand it over to Joe, so where can people find out more, let's say, online about your institute, everything you have going on, perhaps even reach out for help, all that stuff?
Yeah, we do free consultations, by the way, if anybody feels like they could even just get some perspective on this. It's and our website is catholicpsych.com, P-S-Y-C-H. And our handle on Instagram, on all the places, is at Catholic Psych. So you could find us there. And yeah, we can do free consultations for people. So if you're wondering if you could use some help, we'll give you recommendations, even if it's not signing up with us. We do offer help for people anywhere in any state, because we have this model that's so outside the box. It's not considered traditional psychotherapy in that sense. And we have a sliding scale. We have, fees that are reasonable. We try to make our work accessible for anybody. We just started a fund actually for priests as well. We're working with a nonprofit foundation that's going to be supporting priests. So if people are interested, check us out, catholicpsych.com.
CatholicPsych.com. You got it. Greg Bottaro's here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to go?
Greg, I want to talk a little bit about conversion therapy. For those who don't know, that is where, say, someone who is suffering from a same-sex attraction is looking for help, saying that potentially there's a root cause of that, and that person could potentially no longer pursue that attraction. Let me first say a great book who was on this show to talk about that, Robert Riley, Making Gay Okay. Phenomenal book for those who question this. Because sadly, and this is my observation, I'm not obviously a professional, but there was a time that science, not the church, labeled those who had same sex attraction as a mental disorder. Science did this. Then the culture stepped in and bullied the science away from that label. That is a fact. I'm not making that up. That is absolutely factual. What's also factual, and again, if you read that book, Making Gay Okay by Robert Riley, you will see that there are many instances whereby someone who has a same sex attraction has it because of wounds. They could have been molested as a child. This is factual. And if that wound is addressed, that attraction could disappear. That is factual scientific. What's also factual is some states have banned it. Banned it. It's illegal. That's what I have heard. Some states in America that you cannot pursue that. Never mind practice that type of therapy.
Yeah, New Jersey was one of the first.
It doesn't shock me. Does not shock me. They probably passed that at 4:30 on a Friday. That's usually how New Jersey operates. Anyway, I digress. What are your thoughts on this? Because I will guarantee that there are many Catholic parents or Catholics who are interested in this and frankly are either afraid to pursue it, don't think it's available to them, or even think it's effective.
Yeah, good question. There's a bunch of pieces here. I want to make sure we lay this out really clearly because this gets really messy. Number one, conversion therapy is kind of a straw man that the culture created. There's no good therapist in their right mind who's going into any therapy saying, I'm going to change how you feel your desires. And that, of course there are sort of liminal cases where, especially in some ultra religious sects of people, that they might try to clobber over the head some kind of forced change therapy. There's no Catholic therapist that I know doing that. What we do look at is exploring these dynamics that are really deep. And we look at the developmental process of the human person. We look at what gender means in terms of a felt interior experience of oneself and what that means. I mean, we know developmentally, a little boy will go through a period of time where he's like closer to his mom. He's aligning more with his mom. Other times he's moving towards his dad. He's building out the masculine dimensions of personality. That's not to say that he's never, not a male. But the fact is we do have these different facets of personality. Some things we learn from mom, some things we learn from dad. That's why every kid needs a mom and a dad. Why the whole political thing about, same-sex couples adopting children, that's like, no, that's actually really bad for kids because every kid needs a mom. Boy and girls need a mom to help develop parts of their personality, and every girl needs a dad. Every boy needs a dad to develop parts of their personality. Okay, so we can look at where there might have been something missed along those lines of development, where there is a period of time when one's own understanding of femininity and masculinity within oneself overlaps with the development of sexual desire, moving from pre-adolescence into adolescence. And now we have hormones in the brain getting activated, and personal desires now start to align with felt biological urges. And now there might be some crossing of wires here. And then we end up with a homosexual desire. Okay. So yes, science in the 80s changed the definition of homosexuality to something that is no longer disordered. And obviously the behavior of acting out on homosexual desires is intrinsically grave and disordered. So that's wrong. Obviously, that the sciences have been slipping for a long time in our country. But it's very interesting to say, like, we don't hold Catholic therapists, Catholic psychology, properly speaking, would not hold that anybody could change their desires. We don't know. It's a mystery. And so that's why it would never be our intention to say, okay, we're going to start working with this person because we're going to change their desires. But we will enter into a person's inner life to explore with them what they come up with in terms of where their wounds are. Can we process them? Sometimes those desires do change. Sometimes they can change. And it's very mysterious. And we want to reverence the mystery of a person's interior life, while also holding at the same time the both and of the behaviors being intrinsically disordered and therefore harmful. Which is why once a person starts actively engaging with these behaviors, it's a slippery slope. And they go further and further away from the possibility of ever actually accessing the raw vulnerability of where their wounds started. And so this is why it's really important to stop the behaviors, stop the books in the bookstore at the kids' library hours and all this gender nonsense. Like, we have to not let kids start to think that these things are okay, overtly, behaviorally okay, while, and this is very challenging, at the same time, having compassion, reverence, space for listening, for understanding, for stepping into the interior of an individual person and validating them first as a person so that they will be vulnerable to actually explore what might be going on there.
Dr. Greg Bottaro is joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. Greg, let me go here real quick. We only have a few minutes left, but let me go here. Isn't that the story of us all, though? Now, let's just say, for argument's sake, someone has an alcohol problem, okay, and they reach out because they want help in putting down what has become an addiction. You're now dependent on this substance, let's say alcohol. But if somebody was to reach out to a psychologist or psychiatrist to help them with that, you got to do two things, in my view, and this is where I'm going in the last few minutes we have left. Number one, you got to acknowledge there's a problem, and vis-a-vis homosexuality, we're told by the experts that no, can't do that. There's no problem whatsoever. Totally natural. We know that to be lies. We know that to be all lies. But then the other part of it is that, yeah, you got to go back into somebody's childhood. You got to find out what influenced them growing up. Might not have been their parents. Might have had parents that never smoked, never drank. When you're a smoker, you're a drinker. Something happened somewhere along the way, and you're helpless and this is where I'm going. You're helpless as a doctor to try to help that person unless you get into that and understand that. And like you said, there's no stigma there. If you experience something that led you to this behavior, then perhaps we could do something to reinforce a different direction for you and potentially help that person. So you have to acknowledge there's a problem, and you got to dig deep into the person's background.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, I have a podcast called the Being Human Podcast, which you can get to a link through my website, CatholicPsych.com. And if you go to the page for the podcast, it's got a search feature, and you can search up gender as a topic. And I talk about the transgender issues. I'm so glad you're making this point right now, because that was precisely my conclusion talking about the transgender confusion right now, is that we have to build bridges of compassion. And we can do that when we recognize we are all in this together. Whether your issue is this or that or the other, we're all in the same boat. We all have some issues. And that's what's happened is, like, some of the issues are more overt and sort of more obvious. And some of our issues are more hidden. And that creates this false dichotomy. And it kind of creates this us versus them mentality. And if I just check all these boxes, or if I look this way, or if I pray this way, now I'm in the us category instead of the them category. But that's really immature. And if we go deeper, we realize we all got issues. We all need a savior. We're all in this together. And when you start to realize that, we build bridges of compassion. And it's not to say we don't have to be in this boat together by accepting everybody's bad behavior. But we recognize, I don't want to accept my bad behavior. I don't want to accept your bad behavior, but we all need help. Let's do this together. And then that becomes the way to have that both and, without sort of leaning too heavily towards relativistic acceptance of everything or closed-minded judgmentalism and separating out from people that actually really need our love.
No, absolutely. We're coming up. We're coming up on the end of the show with Dr. Greg Bottaro. I would say this, Doc, and I'll ask you for a quick comment because we only have about a minute left. Joe and I at this show, we try to emphasize to people the person who's lying to you and encouraging this destructive behavior. That's the person who, quite frankly, hates you. The Catholic Church and guys like us who are talking like this about brokenness and woundedness, whatever the thing is that's going on in your life, we're the ones that love you because we're telling you the truth. Quick comment, Greg.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a lot more palatable when it starts off with like, and this is what I accuse myself of. This is what I need help with. This is, like I said, like I'm writing to a therapist today. You know, you've had your own experiences. Like we all need help at times for something. And if we can start to recognize that's the human condition, we can start to realize we're not judging and we don't have to think that everybody's judging us. And we can have humility to say we all need some help. And then, yeah, when you have ears to hear, it's like, who's actually helping me grow in holiness and virtue and become a better human by helping me see where my flaws might be? Because we're going to be blind to our own flaws as a rule.
Right.
And when people will point things out to me that I'm blind to myself, I'm like, you're my best friend in the world. You're helping me get to heaven. There's nothing more valuable than that. I'd rather have that than you give me $1 million. Please give me insight into my flaws that I can grow from and actually be closer to getting to heaven. That's going to be more valuable than anything else we can get in this world.
You said it, brother. You said it. Greg, real quick, where can our audience members, website, social media, all that fun stuff, where could they go?
CatholicPsych.com. At Catholic Psych is our social media handle, or you can check us out, the Being Human podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you can get a podcast.
Awesome. Dr. Greg Bottaro, thank you so much, brother, for being here. This was a great conversation. We're going to promote it as we always do. Get it out there, share it. Everybody out there watching us or listening to us at the front line with Joe and Joe, please do the same. These are great conversations. These are important conversations. We have to address these things, and we're very grateful that Greg decided to come on the show. Greg, needless to say, anything you got going on, please come back on the show sooner than later.
Please. This is great. I love talking to you guys. This is fun.
Awesome. And thank you all out there for joining us at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Thanks once again. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.